What's up again, everybody? Legend Story Studios, creator of Flesh and Blood, released a bunch of these pre-con Blitz decks for a bunch of the heroes in the game of Flesh and Blood, and so today we're taking the Kano Blitz deck and we are upgrading it. I'm giving myself a $15 limit, which is the cost of buying one, so if you wanted to buy one of these and then spend that same amount on upgrading it, here's what I would recommend for Kano. So Kano is my favorite hero in Blitz, possibly my favorite hero ever, and this Blitz deck is very well put together. It's a really fun base list, and it's not too dissimilar from the idea that I used to start off playing Kano. By the way, if you want a very basic, brief overview of what Kano is doing, you're essentially playing arcane damage. Arcane damage is damage that can't be blocked, with physical cards from hand, and instead you have to have this null rune equipment, and then you have to pitch cards from your hand to block arcane damage, and that's what Kano does. Sends arcane damage on his turn, and then can turn the top of his deck into an instant speed non-attack action card, and then burn your opponent on their own turn. And if we're looking at this equipment suite, we can see that a couple of these pieces kind of help us to get to that point, and a couple could be probably swapped around. For example, if we wanted to, we could take a look at this gloves slot, which is null rune gloves. Generally unnecessary. We don't have to remove this card, but generally not as necessary in this particular slot for most matchups. Of course, if you're playing against another wizard, you'd want the null rune there. But if we're looking to swap that out for something easy, cheap, the easiest thing I can think of, Blitz is typing in the word gauntlet, is either running the Iron Hide or the Iron Rot Gauntlet. And so because this is Blitz, you can actually have an equipment suite of up to 10 cards here. So we're just going to throw those in there. For the sake of budget, we are just going to keep the Mage Master boots. They are totally fine. The obvious biggest upgrade would be the Storm, not spelled with an N, not spelled with an N, spelled with an M. That's correct. The Storm Striders. This is the #1 single biggest upgrade you can make to Kano, but it's not something you should make right away. It's something you should make once you've really settled on playing Kano and really enjoy his sort of puzzle-like gameplay. We are going to keep the Mage Master boots because they almost do the same thing, just stuck to your turn, relegated to your turn. This Robe of Rapture, however, we are going to swap out, and you know what? I'll leave it in for now, but I'd basically just remove this, and at this point, just play Spellfire Cloak. This is a common, by the way, just a straight up common. The same thing with the other two pieces of equipment, just straight up commons, and I have a running total there at the top. You can see that these things cost next to nothing. They are fantastic, particularly Spellfire Cloak. It does exactly what something like a Fjendal Spring Tunic does, and you can see that that card's not cheap, but this Spellfire Cloak is pretty solid in this list. So that's a great little upgrade to pop in, because this Tunic, unnecessary in a lot of matchups that are faster, whereas Spellfire Cloak is actually just what you run. And then finally, we're looking at Talismanic Lens, which actually is a fantastic little piece already. You don't need to upgrade it, but one thing you consider for this is Ragamuffin's Hat. So if we go and look at Ragamuffin's Hat, this is a combo piece for this deck that often gets used currently in Blitz, and also in Classic Constructed for Kano. And it's also a common, so we could literally just include that if we want to as well. Throw that in there, call it a day. And this equipment suite, all of a sudden, a lot more fleshed out than we had before. You can even include one more piece if you wanted to somewhere in there, just depending on what you want. Now, the deck itself is honestly really well thought out. So we're just going to pop back here. Let's make this zoom out a little bit. It's really well thought out, and the overall game plan is not playing into like this combo strategy that a lot of Kano players used to do in Blitz and currently still do in Classic Constructed, because the main combo piece in the form of Aether Wildfire is no longer accessible in Blitz, but also it's also very complex and complicated, and it's not a very good intro material type card. Instead, we're just getting these really good on-rate, cards that do beneficial things but aren't super out there and pushed as far as power level. So Aether Flares are really good. Aether Spindle's really good. Reverberate, fantastic card. In fact, I'm going to sort by pitch cost. There we go. So these are all your reds, and in general, you're wanting to play your reds as damage on your own turn. Things like Voltic Bolt, which deal 5 arcane damage, fantastic. Aether Spindle deals 4 and then opts based on what it dealt. So if it ends up dealing 2 damage, you get to look at the top 2 cards and arrange them how you wish. Reverberate is honestly is super huge in this style of deck where you're just playing a little bit more just honest and you're just playing good spells. Reverberate is one of those key cards. So this is a card that if we could add more of, maybe consider putting the yellows in, but we'll talk about that later. Scalding Rain, they run all 3 colors of this. They run this card in 6 of in this deck. And it's something that I don't mind at all in the slightest. Based on the way that this is tooled, not bad at all. So overall construction of this deck is pretty solid across the board with a couple of like little nuanced things like Potion of Deja Vu. And they even included my own face. Look, if I go like, it looks just like me. They even included my face in the deck. How cool is that? That card doesn't need to be in this deck, but you can definitely run it just for fun. And again, if you're new to Kano, looking at the number of reds you have versus the number of blues is very important because Kano wants to pitch 3 and look at the top of the deck and then play from the top of the deck. And so you need a good proliferation of blues. And so we run 20 blues in this list, 14 reds, and then a decently large number of yellows and 6. So let's talk about some changes that I would immediately look at and make to this list if we just group this back by default, and we can drop that down. Oh, it doesn't drop down. Unfortunate. Things that I would look at. Timekeeper's Whim, I understand the inclusion. It is a 3/4/5, which is very good into most decks. So we're going to leave that be. But one of the biggest things that stuck out to me very early is the inclusion of Zap in all 3 colors. I don't mind the inclusion of Zap in all 3 colors, but if we're looking for this deck to be, I guess, have the most utility possible, a very easy swap instead of Zap would be Aether Dart. Because Aether Dart does the exact same thing as Zap. So red Zap does 3 damage to target opponent. Aether Dart does 3 damage as well, so exactly the same, except you gain the benefit of being able to target anything. And so all of a sudden now we have some gameplay into anyone that wants to create like an ally at all. So one of the unfortunate matchups is playing into Dromai, and this card allows us to like pop some dragons, which is pretty good. So this is an easy slot in. It's a weird thing you wouldn't necessarily think about, but if we just go Aether Darts instead of Zaps, then all of a sudden we have gameplay a little bit into that hero that we didn't have before. It's an easy fix, an easy change. And also these cards cost like next to nothing, which is crazy because they're commons. And it's just a nice little forward, upward trade in power level. Other things that we can consider, and this is one of the bigger moves, but this was the very, very first thing I thought of when I was like, what cards would I put in this deck to really take it up just another notch? And the number one thing was Lesson in Lava. Lesson in Lava is a Kano specialization, and it's a super rare printed back in Arcane Rising. It's a rarity that no longer exists. Now it's up printed in Majestic in like History Pack 1, for example. But it deals 3 arcane damage to the opponent, and then if it deals any damage, you can go find a wizard card from your deck with the cost equal to or less than what you dealt, and then basically put it on top of your deck. So that either means you're going to draw into it, or you can use Kano's effect to go and look at it and then banish it and then play it. Okay, this card adds a lot of playability and a lot of usefulness to the deck, and honestly, it's not terribly expensive. It's like pretty cheap overall, so this is a definite inclusion in this deck. Now, in order to include this, we do have to remove something, and my first thought is swapping it out, kind of a tit for tat here. Scalding Rain comes out, which deals 3 damage, and Lesson in Lava comes in, which deals 3 damage, plus something else. So you see, we're basically just taking cards that did something and replacing them with cards that do something plus a level of complexity. And I think this is why this deck is so well constructed, is because it's got the same bones. It's just now that we're trying to upgrade it a little bit, things get a little bit more complex. Not terribly so, but a little bit. And that's cool. That's good. I like that. And there's another addition that we can add, and this is where things get a little bit weird. But this is one that I thought of. Nourishing Emptiness. This is one that's a pretty popular play in Blitz right now. in general, and it's been pretty decently in favor for the most part. Nourishing Emptiness is an attack action, and it's not something that you can find off the top of your deck and then play. So its inclusion in this deck does make for some friction that can lead to the gameplay, because if you find this on top of your deck from a Kano, you can't do anything about it. It's a whiff. And so not including it, of course, first of all, it being a Majestic and therefore being a little bit more pricey in a couple of bucks versus like pennies is one thing, but also adding to the level of complexity and the danger of, using Kano's effect and then finding this on top is something you probably don't want to introduce in your first iteration of the Blitz deck. But if this hits, your hero is going to gain 1 intellect, meaning you're going to have a 5-card hand. And you're most likely hitting with this because when there are no attack actions in your graveyard, this has Dominate. So if we include exactly 1 copy of this card, well, it's going to have Dominate if we find it, and it's going to draw us a 5-card hand straight up outright. And that is quite good. That is quite good. Now, I don't want to sub out a blue for this. I don't even really want to touch the yellows too terribly much. I'm going to take a red for a red. And this is something I highly recommend that you do in Kano, is find a number that you're comfortable with as far as reds are concerned. And maybe it's something like 15. That's kind of what I've played in the past, 14, 15. And then just keep it there. So I'm going to chop one of these Timekeeper's Whims. It's a 3 for 5. We're going to sub it out for a 2 for 6 that draws us an extra card and probably wins us the game. I think that's a pretty solid trade, and again, we're making some little changes here and there that aren't too terribly expensive. I mentioned earlier that Reverberate is a really good card, and possibly running the yellows could be something we could include. And I still stand by that. You could consider popping yellows in here, but here are a couple of other considerations I'd possibly make. I've played around with Whisper of the Oracle Blue, but this could be a possible cut consideration. Take that out. Pry doesn't seem super necessary, even though it literally looks like me on the card. Pry doesn't seem super necessary, so you could pop either of those out, and then you could also take out Timekeeper's Whim, and then you start swapping in other blues. Now, I'm not going to recommend that you do this right away, but Gaze the Ages is a fantastic blue to include. One of the best blues you could possibly include. Now, it is a couple of bucks per card, and so if we want to kind of avoid going too hot and heavy into the cost, you can just skip out on these. And the reason I say this is we're changing blues around a little bit, and in doing so, it doesn't necessarily have a huge effect on like winning the game, but it does have a lot of power in what you can do with this. And again, the reason that this is a good upgrade is because it increases the things we can do, which increases the complexity of this deck. It allows us to opt to. That's literally all it does. It costs nothing, and we look at the top 2 cards of our deck and rearrange them. But if we find this off a Kano and we've already played something, then we can resolve this card and then bring it back to our hand, and then we have a blue in hand with which we can pay 3 to do the Kano effect again. So this is definitely a card that you can swap in as well. Super solid. Now, if you didn't want to go with this and you wanted to get something slightly less pricey, because I think it is, Sonic Boom. Sonic Boom is your ticket right here. It's my favorite card in Kano. It's a fickle beast, though, because if it hits something you can't land, then you're real sad. But Sonic Boom is the next best thing that you could possibly upgrade. So if you wanted to get super tricky with it, you pop out the Voltix and you go Sonic Booms as well. And now all of a sudden we're starting to get into real good Kano ranges that you like to play. It's like really starting to feel like a Kano deck that we know with these breakdowns and with this equipment suite. So final deck list in the comments below. Feel free to leave a comment down there while you're at it. Which deck should I do next? Of all the ones they've just released, of Dash, and let's see what else they put out. They put out Bravo, and really of just about every hero now. Which one would you like me to upgrade, sticking to a limit of like 15 bucks? Leave a comment down below letting me know. Thank you for being patient. It's been a while since I've uploaded. My wife and I bought a house. That's exciting for us, and I've been quite busy. If you enjoyed the video, make the number slightly climb higher. Wait, climb slightly higher. One of those two. I don't know. As always, thanks for watching.